Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to UnSpun episode 64. My name's Jan Irvin. I'm here with my co-host Joe Atwill, and our guest today is April Boden. April's an old friend of mine. She used to run our old podcast. What was your podcast called, April?
Truth or Talk.
Truth or Talk. And,
Yeah.
I'm excited to have you on today. I've been meaning to have you on for, I suppose, years. Years ago, I had done a show with Dr. Andrew Wakefield, and we can talk about the Wakefield effect later, about vaccines and everything. So
Yes.
I really wanted to have you on for this very important topic. So there's so few people who are aware of the potentially dangerous effects of vaccines on many of us, and and how they affect some of us. But well, what I should also do is mention that we should give it out each of our websites. April, what is your website?
It's aidensrecovery.wordpress.com.
Okay, and of course I'm at gnosticmedia.com, and you can donate there. And Joe, what is your website?
CaesarsMessiah.com.
And you know what, I wanted to mention before we get going here, a very sweet letter I actually got in the mail this week from Kane. He is age 6. And he sent a little donation, and he said, "I like your shows, and almost every night I listen to them with my mom. I'm donating some of my chore money to you. Thank you for helping teach my mom and dad." From Kane, age 6. My parents are going to match my donation. So I really thought that was sweet, and I really appreciate that, Kane. Thanks so much. And so anyway, April, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Jan. And it's good to meet you, Joe. We met just before we started. So,
Yeah,
but of course, Jan mentioned our name.
Yeah. Well, April, it's such an important issue. How do you want to start out, informing people about vaccinations and about the critical issues concerning them?
Right. Well, it's a really timely episode that you're doing here because this is actually Autism Awareness Month, but I call it Vaccine Injury Awareness Month because it's actually the most common cause of autism is vaccination, despite what people will tell you on the mainstream media. And so it's a really timely episode that you're doing. And there's a documentary coming out that myself and my son are both in called The Truth About Vaccines by Ty Bollinger. And Ty Bollinger just did 2 docuseries called The Truth About Cancer, and then now he's diving into this. And those 2 subjects are actually connected because it's well established for many years that vaccines are quite connected to the rise of cancer. And now they're connected to the rise of autism. So what I'd like to start by explaining like how I started researching this and why I got into this, because, I started off really not knowing anything about vaccines, just like everybody else. And when I first had my children, this was before the Jenny McCarthy and the Wakefield effect and all that stuff was going on. Or actually, Wakefield was already out there, but it wasn't as a hot button issue in the mainstream media at the time. So I didn't really know. I'd heard some things here and there about vaccines causing autism, but it was
April,
just sort of hearsay.
Is a bit choppy, just so you know. I'm not sure if somebody else is using internet over there or something, but it's kind of choppy. If you have any other programs, you may want to try turning them off.
Okay, well, this is the only device that I have that's on right now.
All right, that's okay. Go ahead.
You got me okay right now?
Yeah, it's okay right now. Go ahead.
Okay. Well, anyway, so I started off just really not knowing anything about it, and I was just a young mom who took her children to the pediatrician like I thought I was supposed to after they were born. And my second child, my first child, actually, I had all these questions about vaccines when I was taking him to the pediatrician, but he had been sick as a little boy. So we had actually delayed a lot of his shots. But I had asked the doctors about, I had heard mercury was in the vaccines. I heard vaccines related to autism. I asked all these questions. And for parents who have gone into their pediatrician's office and they've asked these questions, you are basically treated like you're really stupid, and they are offended the fact that you even ask it. So you get kind of told to shut up and just, so her answer to me, the pediatrician at the time, when I asked these questions was basically like, that's last year's problem. And she shooed me just like that. And so I just said, all right, I didn't really know how to respond to that, and I wanted to be a good mom. So I went ahead and did what she told me to do and have my child vaccinated. And when my second son was born, I thought that because my first son didn't have any problems, I thought, well, maybe this isn't true what these people are saying. I didn't think anti-vaxxers were crazy or anything like that. I just thought I didn't know. And I didn't at the time have the tools to know how to research and understand the difference between a fallacious argument and real scientific evidence. I just kind of, so there was all of this contradictions in everything that I looked into. And because I did actually look into it, I did research it, but most of the things that I saw were, I couldn't tell the difference between a news article and a scientific study. I didn't know. So to me...
Right. And you didn't know how to spot fallacies and things like that. Then you didn't know a contradiction was a lie or an error. Exactly.
I didn't understand. So I didn't know who was right and who was wrong. And so basically I just was compliant. It wasn't that I was, an anti-vaxxer and I was asking all these questions and it wasn't that I was super pro-vax either. I just was compliant because I thought that that's what I needed to do and that's what the doctor told me to do. And so I did. And so Aiden was vaccinated on schedule and had received everything that they had told us to have. So around 13 months, he got the MMR, the varicella, which is chickenpox, and the pneumococcal all in one day. And after that, he got really sick. He got a fever, and he started having digestive problems. He started having diarrhea, and he having difficulty sleeping. And then he seemed to kind of get better, but then once he came out of his sickness, he was walking on his toes, and he was doing other kind of strange things. And he had some language, but the language was sort of a bizarre pattern after that. It was like words that he was saying were gone, but then he would say kind of random things over and over again. And so I was starting to notice this odd behavior, but at the time, this was in 2006, autism was 1 in 150. Right now it's 1 in 50. So it's huge. And most people have seen autistic kids like all over the place. But at the time, I didn't know, none of my friends had autistic kids. So I didn't know that that's what it was. I had no idea. So I took him back to the pediatrician and I said, he had language and now the language is gone. So the next visit that we had, and he's speaking a little bit, but it's bizarre. And she dismissed me and said, well, he's still within the normal range of language. If he has a few words here and there, that's normal. So, and I said, well, what about the vaccines? And she said, no, that's too easy an answer. That was her explanation. That's too easy an answer. So I didn't have, I just figured, okay, well, she answered my question, even though she didn't. So she went ahead and vaccinated him again. And then all the language that he had was gone. So it was just, then it was becoming more and more obvious to me, so I was starting to really, the next time we went in, I said, I really don't, I really think that this has something to do with the vaccines. And, she said, well, no, it's not related. And she convinced me that it wasn't related. And said that, even convinced me that his gut issues, the diarrhea, the chronic diarrhea, and the not being able to sleep and all that was typical of somebody with autism, but didn't explain why. Just said that was typical and that I didn't have anything to worry about. So, because now I'm sorry, I jumped ahead. Because by the time he was 2.5, he actually was diagnosed with autism. So the next time I brought him back, she did diaggnose him with autism.
She gives him autism and then diagnoses him with autism.
Exactly. So then we went into what she sent me. She referred me to an early interventionist. So these are just people from the state who pay for, the state pays for children under the age of 3 to receive what they call early intervention. And this is therapies, speech therapy, occupational therapy, various therapies that they put you into. And so once I got stuck with this, I was very eager to get started because I was like, let's fix this problem and, let's do this. And she kind of gave me the impression that, if you do these therapies, he'll get a lot better and, you don't need to panic, like just, take care of this and everything will be fine. And, and it might not be, but you don't have to worry about that now. And so she sent me to the early interventionist, and and how the system works is basically you start in, you get on a waiting list. It takes 2 3, 4, 5, 6 months before you get these therapies in place. So he was diagnosed at 2.5. So by the time he was, we got all that stuff going, he was about to turn 3, and they pull it all away. So it's kind of like it works in the same way that drug dealers like to get you hooked on their services, and then they pull it away, or then all of a sudden you got to pay more, things like that. That's basically how it works in the state system when it comes to therapies in children with these illnesses. They love to give you a lot early on, and they start pulling it away. And then you have to go and then work with another department. So what they did was they started taking it all away and said that now it's the responsibility of the school district. So when you're 3, the school takes over. So guess what? He had to receive another vaccine in order to get into school. And so we had, so I was freaking out because he had been receiving these therapies, and he was starting to get better from the therapies. He had actually regained some language. He was learning all the names of his zoo animals on this puzzle that he liked. And so I was thinking, I went into panic, like, oh my God, these therapies are so useful, and they're going to take him away. But now I have to send him to school and get him vaccinated again. Well, I really don't want to get him vaccinated, but I mean, if I have to keep these therapies, I will. And so we went ahead and did it again in order to send him to school. And then that was pretty much it. The language was gone. Not only was the language gone, and all the gut problems, all those things got accelerated, but then he started doing things like biting himself, banging his head, and being aggressive. None of that stuff had been present before. There were, we had already had the diagnosis, but these were really disturbing behaviors that were scary. And we were like, this is, we didn't really know what was going on with him. And so at that point, I was like, I don't care how many Jedi mind tricks you put on me. I can't keep doing this to him. This is like, it was a horrible mistake even to send him to school. I mean, and that's a whole nother thing that you can get into about the system, but it was what I thought I needed to do at the time. So it just was a matter of my ignorance, not understanding how to look through, decipher fact from fiction, and just wanting to do what they were telling me was best for him, but they didn't actually have the right answers. So when he went to school, that was pretty much it. And then that was the last time, and we didn't do it again after that. But it was extremely obvious. And he does have on medical record that he does have a vaccine injury, and that it was responsible for his regressive autism. But the way that the system works, and maybe not everybody knows this, is that when your child has a vaccine injury in this country, you actually cannot sue the pharmaceutical companies. You can sue what's called, you can report it to VAERS, which is a vaccine injury reporting system, and you go through the big red tape of that, and you can try to get onto through the vaccine court, which would then take the money from the taxpayers if you actually win your case. But there's a 3-year shelf life. You have to do it within 3 years of the time, and it's really difficult to prove, especially when it comes to autism, because they don't correlate the immunological and biological issues that are associated with it. So they only base it on the behaviors that they see, the spinning and the lack of language, et cetera, et cetera. So making that connection is still something that, a lot of medical doctors can't do. And if they do, well, that's the Wakefield effect. So then we can get into that.
Wow. Well,
Sorry, I was just saying that's when they lose their jobs and their livelihood and everything for telling the truth.
Exactly. It's called Wakefield.
Yeah.
Yeah. If you've been Wakefielded, then that means that you have as a doctor, you've had the courage to say, we see a connection between vaccines and autism. And even if you're not against vaccines, doctors who even still support vaccination, even if they see the connection, will be Wakefielded. So they'll be thrown. It's like being thrown out of the fraternity. You're going to be blackballed. That's the end of you. So that's what that means.
Well, let's see. So, and I just wanted to show this little image on screen here that somebody sent, but it's about thimerosal, etc. Mercury thermometers are banned for being phased out in every public school in North America because mercury is so toxic. It's extremely dangerous for it to be given or even near children. Saying that, the same schools inform children that mercury-containing vaccines, which are injected under the skin, are safe and effective. It only makes sense if you think about it.
Right.
If you don't think of it.
Yeah, April, in the outline that you sent to us, you had had a kind of progression of topics, and one of the ones that at the beginning that I think is important is the effectiveness of vaccines historically. I've often warned the public about the danger of vaccinations, and what I've said is that first of all, this mandatory vaccination phenomena that's
Can you get a little closer to your mic, Joe?
In the public schools and throughout the world, really, that this mandatory vaccination phenomena is very dangerous politically, because basically it's like Russian roulette. If the government has the capacity to make citizens have vaccinations mandatorily, then all you need is one really evil person to assume the mantles of power, and then he can basically wipe out the entire population, because that's the kind of control someone has when they can basically inject something legally and mandatorily into every single person. So I've always been saying, this is really a dangerous situation just politically. We should try to resist this, because it just makes no sense to give up these kinds of freedoms, to the government, because basically it assumes the government's always going to be benign, and we know that historically that just isn't the case. And then the other thing I've been saying is I saw data that was put into graphs by Susan Humphreys. And when I studied that, I could see that, and I did some further research beyond just the graph she presented, I could see that really what had happened is that there was this trend that had been established by the onset of hygiene, basically better plumbing, awareness of washing hands and things like this, was having a tremendous effect upon mortality relative to the classic, contagious diseases. And then in the middle of these trajectories, which were very, very well established and long held, the vaccination would be, brought out, but that it would never change any of these vectors. And that then after a while, this trend that had started years before the vaccination would go way down. And then the vaccination people would say, you see, the vaccine is effective. It's really responsible for this. But anyone who knew the, this data set would say, no, that's ridiculous. The vaccine didn't change the vector at all. What do you know, and what do you think people should know about basically the effectiveness of vaccinations?
Well, what you're talking about, one of the biggest sound bites that they come out with in order to support the idea of mandatory vaccination is something called herd immunity. And so the idea is that you need to be vaccinated, and we all need to be vaccinated in order to protect the herd. This is what eugenics. So, right, it's the safety that it's not about.
Well, your signal's really choppy. I don't know what's going on there, but it's really bad. Yeah. Anyway, keep going. Let's see if it gets better there. If you have Skype or any other programs running that use internet, please try to turn them off.
All right. Okay. Let's see. How's that, yeah? Better?
Well, so far it's better. Yeah, keep going.
Okay. So, so it's based on herd immunity. So herd immunity is a huge soundbite that they like to use in order to support the idea of mandatory vaccination. But that's taking a huge assumption, for one, that they work. Okay, so when you establish that they don't work, or very rarely do they work, or you actually can't, on most cases, prove whether or not they work, then you take a big chunk of that out. So let's talk about how well do they work. So, for example, one of the things, a good example would be, we recently, like a couple years ago in California, there was a measles outbreak. So the idea was that there was going to be, they were blaming it on the unvaccinated. Well, if you dissect that, if you actually looked at many of the mainstream articles, they would admit the fact that the majority of people who had actually contracted the measles were vaccinated. So what happens when you get a measles vaccine is measles is actually caused by a live virus, or it's, you're injected with a live measles virus. And so a couple things can occur when you're injected with a live virus. One thing is called shedding. which means that you can actually be shedding the virus yourself and pass it on to other people. So you may be not symptomatic, but you will actually be able to spread that to other people. And it's very clear, this is well established in all of the vaccine research, and it is even recommended whenever you receive a live that you're actually not supposed to be around newborns and immunocompromised. So what is the soundbite that they always say? Well, everybody has to be vaccinated to protect the newborns and the immunocompromised. But the fact is actually the opposite is true, that if you're vaccinated, you're more likely to spread the disease because you will not be symptomatic. You have suppressed the illness. That doesn't mean you're not a carrier of the illness. So you might not show any symptoms, but you're able to pass it on. And this is actually what we know is happening, because when we have these outbreaks and the majority of the people are actually vaccinated, well, either the vaccine doesn't work, which it doesn't in a lot of cases. And something like measles, the shelf life of the antibodies, the best you can get is between 2 to 10 years of immunity. So that's why if you acquire it naturally, and you are immune for life, but if you acquire it through vaccination, through an artificial means, then the best case scenario is that you're going to be immune to it for 2 to 10 years. And so this is why they always have to keep giving you more and more and more in all of these booster shots. So when you have been vaccinated, so let's say it did work on you, but you're not going to actually get it, you can still contract it and be a carrier and pass it on to other people. So the vaccinated are actually more dangerous than the unvaccinated, because if you're unvaccinated and you contract it naturally, then you have it and you're not going to go out and go picking up and kissing newborns. But if you're vaccinated and you are suppressing the illness, you might not be aware of the fact that you're actually passing it on to other people. And most people don't realize that they're not supposed to be around newborns and immunocompromised for the first few months, because they can be shedding it and giving it away, or they can contract it. And but they never point to the vaccination failure. What they do
April, I just had a question. How long after someone is vaccinated are they able to, not be sick, but to infect someone else with the disease? How long? Is it a month, a week?
The recommendation is about 2 to 3 weeks. So they can be shedding for about 2 to 3 weeks. So that's the incubation period.
Thank you.
And one of the other things that I'm sorry,
You still there? Go ahead. Keep talking.
Yeah,
You're cutting out really badly, so you'll just have to fight through it. I don't know what the deal is.
Who, me? I'm cutting out?
Yeah. Joe is not, but you are.
Oh, okay. Well, I don't know either.
Keep going.
Sir. Okay, so so in the case of like the measles, for example, going back to that, what we're seeing more and more is a lot of our kids who have actually been damaged by the measles vaccine. It's not that they aren't that they're immune to it. They infected with the measles, but it resides in different areas in their body. So a doctor by the name of Arthur Krigsman had invented something called a pill camera, and the pill camera was a camera that was small enough as a pill, so the kids were able to swallow it, and they were able to find that they actually had measles on their intestines. And so some of these kids that have extreme inflammation and all these gut problems, and they were affected after receiving the measles vaccine, actually did contract the measles. It just didn't express outwardly. They were able to find them in their gut. And they lived for a lot longer period of time. They weren't actually able to normally, pass it the way you would if you contracted it in a normal way. And the other thing with the efficacy with vaccination, first of all, the method of delivery, there's no evidence to show that we actually can develop immunity through injection, because the normal way you would receive an illness would be through your skin. You would breathe it in, you would catch, it'd be through your mouth, one of these normal orifices. But when we go through injection, it actually doesn't go through the same process of the immune system. So there's really no way of testing whether or not it provides immunity. When they do these efficacy tests, they actually aren't looking for immunity. What they're looking for is antibodies. And antibodies can help you fight a disease, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you won't get sick. And vaccines that are made without live viruses, well, they don't generally work at all. I mean, we've seen time and time again that for example, the pertussis vaccine, they recently did a study using baboons, and they found that the vaccinated baboons were not only contracting whooping cough, but they were passing it on. And so it didn't work at all. I mean, they said that their symptoms were a little bit less than the unvaccinated, but I mean, I don't see, you know, having a little bit less of a cough doesn't really justify taking that risk of injecting it.
So, you know, why do, in your opinion, why do parents give their authority over to doctors?
I think it's a lack of ability to figure out fact from fiction. I think most of the time it's that. I mean,
they give up. It's a loss of self-confidence in themselves, and then giving the authority over to someone else, isn't it?
Exactly. I mean, they don't really know. When you go in, you assume that the doctor has more knowledge than you. You kind of, it's like that they are. They're seen kind of as divine in our society, and that they know all this stuff, but they actually don't know anything about vaccination. One of the biggest myths is that doctors are actually trained in medical school about vaccines. But let me tell you, the only thing that they're trained in is the schedule. They actually do not know whether or not, they don't know what's in them. And that's one of the biggest questions nobody ever asks. What is in a vaccine? Because once you actually start deciphering the list and you take a vaccine, you look at the insert and you break down each ingredient one by one, what you see is not only are these carcinogenic, neurotoxic, you know, but there's also really unusual things that people will not know the effect of, for example, like aborted fetal tissues or the, aborted fetal tissues, that's human babies that they use to make the live viruses. You cannot make a live virus on a dead host. So what they do is, after a baby has been aborted, while it's still alive, they create the live virus. So there is a scientific term called insertional mutagenesis. And this is where we know that when you're injecting the DNA of one animal into the DNA of another, that it will cause all kinds of genetic scrambling.
So you can have a pig disease move over to a monkey, or a monkey, you know, like a monkey simian virus transfer over to humans.
Exactly. I mean, it can cause all kinds of genetic mutations. It can cause hormonal imbalances. It can cause, you know, and there's even some theory that it's causing a gender disorder, because if you're injected with the baby, a female is injected into a male, or vice versa.
Well, and an Italian doctor just came out recently stating that, you know, to the Italian government, that he felt that vaccines were increasing homosexuality.
And it wouldn't, I mean, it would completely make sense, because the adjuvants that they're using, all these ingredients that I'm talking about, are well known to be hormones are very easily imbalanced by anything in your environment. And so, but they're injecting it right into you. So that's the easiest.
We lost you there. Are you still there? April? You still there, Joe?
I'm here.
April. I don't know what's going on with April's signal there. It looks like we've lost her. April, we lost you for the last like 30, 40 seconds there, so you'll have to repeat all that.
I'm so sorry. There's the adjuvants that I'm talking about. That's the thimerosal or the mercury or the aluminum, and any of these things on their own is capable of causing a hormonal imbalance. But then you're also adding in the fact that they're injecting the DNA of other living animals, and that is something that they don't know actually what that's going to do. If that's going to cause any kind of, I mean, we do know that it can cause mutation. And if you read the vaccine inserts, the pharmaceutical companies are quite aware that this has the potential to cause mutagenics and cancer. Well, and the reason that we know this is because they say right in the vaccine insert, these haven't been tested for carcinogenics or mutagenics.
So check this out. You know, just a quick little segue here. Just before my son turned 3, we were going down to Peru. And in Peru, they have a higher rate of polio from poverty and stuff, and people living, 10, 12 people living in a room and this kind of stuff. And they suggested we get our son a polio vaccine. Well, we're down there, and on the second day, or the night of the second day we're there, my son had paralysis. He went completely limp. He couldn't do anything but breathe, move his mouth, blink. He could talk a little bit, but the rest of his body was completely limp. And, we called the doctor, and the doctor said, oh, well, I don't know what it could be, and he suggested maybe it was from going from Arequipa, which is at like 11,000 feet or 10,000 feet or so, down to sea level at Mollendo. And he said maybe that's what it was. But luckily, in the morning, when we got up, my son was completely normal again. And he didn't have any effects since then. But then when I get back, I go in and I read the polio vaccine warnings. And it says right there, paralysis is one of the side effects. You know? So, I mean, it really is a massive risk that people take this stuff. You know, we should probably go into, you know, some of these, you know, the most common myths about vaccines. You know, they're safe and effective, don't cause side effects. We kind of already talked about that. What about Jonas Salk? Did we already talk about that?
Oh, well, no, we didn't. And it's a good thing that you just brought up polio, because let's talk about polio. Now, polio wasn't considered a dangerous disease until the invention of certain pesticides into our environment. So basically, polio did not cause paralysis in the majority of people who contracted polio. It was just considered a regular, like a cold. It was something that you can get, and you can pass on. About only 0.01% actually got paralysis after they contracted polio. So what happened was we started to introduce certain pesticides into the environment. First one was lead arsenic, and then DDT. And once these started being brought into our environment, then all of a sudden, all these people, we started having these outbreaks in the areas that this was being introduced of paralysis. And so what originally, these people were being diagnosed with toxicity, and they were being treated for that. But then what the CDC did, what they like to do, is because you can't sue a virus, so rather than blaming it on industry and that they were poisoning the public, they actually said they redefined polio. So they changed the diagnosis, they changed the definition, and then by doing so, they were able to actually blame their problem, what industry was doing, and saying that was being caused by polio. And so when Jonas saw, so what happened was then they realized what they were doing. They realized this problem. And so the DDT and the lead arsenic was being waned out of existence, but they didn't pull it right away. They just started like letting it go. And as it was starting to disappear, so were the cases of polio. But then when Jonas Salk came up with the vaccine, the polio was almost already gone, but he brought it up, and then all of a sudden he's the hero, and he started vaccinating everybody anyway. And then they're saying that, well, yeah, polio, see how it was eradicated by Jonas Salk. No, it was already being eradicated because, they had changed the diagnosis. So it wasn't really.
Right. And then, plumbing came along, better housing for the poor came along, et cetera. Yeah. And you didn't have 10 or 12 people living in a mud type hut with the chickens and the goats and the cattle.
Yeah.
And, as was often in poor Meso and, Central South American countries.
Well, and in farmland America, that was the case.
Right.
Some of those behaviors didn't change until like in the beginning of the 20th century.
Right. So as soon as plumbing and all of that came along, that's what really changed all of this.
Exactly.
And so then what they've done is they've switched the credit from plumbing over to vaccines.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So, they've just given the credit to vaccines, and a lot of the diseases, for example, like the measles I brought up earlier, was really almost completely eradicated before the introduction of the vaccine. So, and they don't mention to you any of the diseases. And when you hear on the mainstream media and they're talking about all these unvaccinated people with all these diseases, they don't mention the million other diseases that you can contract that there's no vaccine for. You only hear about the things that there's a vaccine for, or one that they're working on, because you have to understand that everybody in the mainstream media is all working for pharmaceutical. They're all working for pharma. Merck and all these people are all of their sponsors. And the other thing, as I mentioned with the pediatricians,
you need a website.
They're not actually taught in medical school anything about vaccines. They don't know what's in them. They don't know if they work or not. They don't know anything like that. All they know is the schedule. And they are given incentives by insurance companies. For example, Blue Shield can pay up to $400 per child who's fully vaccinated. So their incentive to keep you going and to perform this with Jedi mind tricks is really like, they're going to make a lot of money. They stand to make an extra $100,000 or so a year by having a fully 64% of their patients fully vaccinated.
And that's just an incredible conflict, that they're making money off of these children being vaccinated, and yet they're not disclosing that to the parents, because if they would, then maybe more parents would go, I'm a little troubled by the conflict. I'm going to do some research into this to make sure that what you're telling me is true. If the parents could see the conflict, knew about the conflict, then maybe that condition that you and Jan had mentioned earlier about people just seeing doctors as basically, dispensing the truth somehow.
The good old advericunium fallacy.
Yeah, the advericunium. Yeah. They wouldn't be so likely, to just accept these guys as authorities. They would be more to the degree of going, I'm going to study this. I want to learn a little bit about this myself, because I just can't trust someone who's getting paid, right, to give me the truth. It's just an obvious conflict, and I want to do a little research. That's because I think if more parents just took that step, right, if all they did was, before the vaccine's going, I'm just going to do a little bit of research, I think the vaccine industry would collapse in about a month, because I think that there's just so much now data that is at the very least frightening, that I think the normal instinct to preserve children that parents have would kick in, and they would go, until you can prove to me that the stuff is safe, I'm just going to hold my children aside. The burden is on you. You see, here's all of this data showing that the stuff is dangerous, all these correlations we can see, autism is skyrocketing, and all these other disorders. Where is your evidence that your vaccine isn't causing
it? Right, and that, as long as all of these vaccines and all of this rhetoric from the allopathic medical community has been out there for 70, 80 plus years. Yeah. Eat low fat, eat low cholesterol, eat your grains, take your vaccines, etc. We should have had a total eradication of autism and cancer and heart disease and all this stuff, but yet all of these things are at their highest in human history.
Well, just look at the population. The population, when you walk around, there's so many weak and sick people in the United States. It's just, you cannot avoid it when you walk the streets. If with all of this medicine that's been dumped on top of us, just look at a picture of a group of people at the beach from 1950 or earlier.
Absolutely.
They're not fat. They're not sick. They don't hobble around, with golf carts. There's something that's gone wrong with the whole, medical and health facilities in the United States. Parents need to know this. They should just look at the obvious and try to find ways to protect their children.
Absolutely right. Let's get into some other of these myths that you've got here. April, which ones didn't we cover so far? Okay, so do they provide immunity from the diseases? I guess we did cover that one, didn't we?
Not really. Do you want to talk about that?
I did cover it a little when I gave you the example of measles. And then there's the pertussis vaccine and a couple different ones, because it really, that question varies from vaccine to vaccine. But when you're talking about the majority of vaccines that are using dead viruses, they actually don't really work at all. And then some of them that use live viruses, you might get up to 2 to 10 years of immunity from it, but that doesn't mean that you're not a carrier of it. So you can still contract it and pass it on to other people, and you can still shed it from the live virus itself. So the only way to really prove whether or not you've actually gotten immunity to it is if they check for titers. And this isn't actually proof, by the way, but this is the best you can get. And they'll look for titers, which are antibodies. So they'll say, okay, you have an adequate number of antibodies for the measles, therefore we consider you to be immune. But guess what? You may still actually get the measles. And they'll tell you this.
And that's good. That goes on to your next point there. Did vaccines actually prevent you from getting or spreading the disease? And we kind of covered that too a little bit.
Yeah, they don't. They really don't. And it's certainly not worth the risk, even if you can find a few vaccines that you say, well, this one's got a pretty good rate. First of all, you got to look at how they do them, because a lot of times when they're testing, they're not doing a regular, trial to see before and after. Sometimes what they'll do is they'll take this vaccine, like let's say pertussis, they love to trick you with this one because they know how ineffective it is. So they'll take this vaccine that we use to inoculate like 12-year-olds, and we'll compare it to this other one where we inoculated, infants in another country, and we'll see if the antibodies match, then therefore we can call it effective. So they don't actually even do a real before and after study to see if they had the antibodies before or
isn't it true that none of the vaccines have really ever been safety tested?
I mean, not really. I mean, they do trials, to see if they're safe, but they don't actually test a true placebo. So for example, what a placebo would mean to you, what would you think if I said, well,
saline.
They did
Saline
exactly.
would be a placebo.
So that's not how they're done. So what they'll do when they're testing for safety is that they'll take the vaccine, and then the placebo group and the control group, but the placebo group is still receiving all of the adjuvants. The only thing that's been removed is the virus itself. So they don't actually give you a true placebo.
Well, in fact, they can't really test the vaccines in a real-time basis because vaccines only exist in effectiveness for specific situations of a virus. And so that they're always mutating. You don't know if the flu this year is anything.
What was that one, like cholera or something? You hear these guys off in the jungle or something, or something from mosquitoes, and they would take that and get relief from the vaccine. But I mean, other than ones like that, they're really limited, aren't they, for any effectiveness?
They're very limited in general. Africa and, some of these other countries where we're being told that they're eradicating diseases are having a lot of problems with their vaccines. And they're not having.
Well, and they also renamed malaria AIDS down there to get the AIDS money. And that's a whole other scandal that we can cover another time. But
they're also renaming vaccine injury as AIDS. So that's happening as well.
Oh, really?
It's not, So they're actually giving people, they're calling it that, and they're chasing. Malawi News actually had a report not that long ago that people were being rounded up by gunpoint and forced because they knew that these vaccines were causing harms to their family. In Pakistan, there was actually an undercover CIA vaccine program. The CIA had put out a fake vaccine program that they said they were vaccinating against, I think it was polio, and but it was really an undercover program for them to spy. And in Pakistan, well, the Pakistani people, what they thought was going on was that the vaccines were actually causing sterility. And so they started killing doctors. This has really happened. There was a bunch of parents that went out and actually murdered doctors because they were convinced that they were causing their children to become sterile. And then, so that's why the CIA had to come clean and say it was actually a fake program, because they knew that, they had to stop what was going on. And then when they came back and said, well, we want to, eradicate this problem for you guys, they said, they had all this resistance. Well, why? Of course they had resistance. What did they think was going to happen?
CIA is always meddling with everything. It's amazing.
April, so I want to, I don't want to run out of time, but I have a question is, what will, do you think, what could make parents specifically and the public in general resist vaccinations? Because that's a question I've asked myself, and Jan and I have talked about it. I mean, there's just so much evidence that they don't work. There's so much evidence that they do harm, and there is so much potential for just political malfeasance. I know you talk about the profit motive, but people who study our government often come to the conclusion that there's malfeasance inside it. And they really don't mind a dumbed down population. In fact, it actually is to their benefit. And so if you believe that, then you look at vaccinations in a whole other way. You look at them as, wow, this could be, the brave new world where you have, stratification of intelligence.
That's exactly what we discussed with Rima Labo, General Stubblebine's wife, when she was on the show.
And so my question to you is what do you think about what would be something that could really get the public to start resisting? Can you think of anything? I mean, what should Jan and I bring up in future episodes that you think would be valuable for the public to start to, really get the public to resist this stuff?
Well, I think that people need to be, you guys are kind of already doing it with you're talking about the trivium, because that's the first step into getting people to understand how to critically look at this, and not just, like I didn't have that at the time.
Oh, there's a contradiction. Opinions are
Yeah.
like a-holes. Throw your hands up in the air and give up, right?
Right. Once I understood how to research and I started using my critical thinking, even before I'd found the trivium, but I just started doing better research, it was very easy. I could break it apart in a second. It was like, oh, herd immunity, that's a lie. Efficacy, that's a lie. And then you realize that all of these adjuvants, you're taking all this risk for no reason. It was really easy. So that's the first step, is trying to get people to see that they actually need to do this. They need to learn how to think.
You can't just regurgitate or repeat something that you heard somewhere else from the news or from whatever. Right. You actually need to look this stuff up, study things. There's dozens of documentaries out there. In fact, you mentioned one earlier, Truth About Vaccines docuseries, which it launches tomorrow.
Yeah.
So, and you're in that. I've seen the preview of you and Aiden in it.
And that's Ty Bollinger's new documentary?
Yeah, that's the Ty Bollinger.
Yeah, and, recently Vaxxed came out exposing all of this. Kennedy Jr. has been out helping Trump, apparently trying to get something going to... didn't Trump put a 90-day halt on vaccines, or no?
Well, I didn't hear about that. I mean, Trump has said that he does believe that there is an association between vaccines and autism. And he has also admitted that his own child is not vaccinated, or they delay vaccines. I'm not exactly sure, but he does lean towards that side. Kennedy, on the other hand, is pro-vaccine. And his idea is that we're going to green our vaccine. So he did some research back in 2005, I think it was, and he did an article at a Rolling Stone magazine called Deadly Immunity, where he tracked the use of thimerosal. And they knew that mercury was causing autism and all kinds of problems.
Yeah, thimerosal, for those who don't know, is basically a type of mercury.
It's mercury. And so they knew that a long time ago, that was causing autism and a series of problems. All that information was released to Congress. There was a congressman by the name of Dan Burton who actually did an investigation, and all this data was released to him, that basically, they knew that this was causing autism and all kinds of other problems and cancer and so on. But and then that's hidden from the public, but it's well established, through his research. So Kennedy was involved in that. He was involved in researching, but he is actually in favor of vaccines, and he has not come out and said whether or not he supports mandatory vaccination. So I would be a little bit, hesitant to give him credit, simply because from what I've done in my research, it is not possible to provide a safe immunity through inoculation. And so I don't really believe that that's something that I think, it's just something that has to be done away with, because I don't find any evidence to the contrary. So I can't find any evidence to show that there's any safe way to inject somebody, even if they try to green it up as much as possible. And it wouldn't work.
I just want to say, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I just absolutely support that position. Well, after I saw Susan Humphrey's data, I actually tried to do some research into vaccines in general. And I looked in some of the methodologies that the vaccination companies were citing in these studies, and I could see that the statistics were absolute nonsense, that the methodologies were just designed to produce a result. They hadn't really tested anything. There was no way to know if any of these vaccinations were doing anything, and there was no guarantee about anything. It was just an absolute, sophist paradise, and no one was calling them on it. So I suspected malfeasance immediately. I said, well, something really sick seems to be going on here. Hopefully it's only, money, but I wouldn't be surprised if, in fact, at some levels, the government's already basically, kind of enjoying the fact that so many of the citizens are suffering mentally because of these things. And, with Kennedy, I have the same thought. If he isn't going to come forward and say, we need to have a complete, open, scientific review of the whole sick process, then I'm just not going to trust him at all.
Right. Yeah, and if you're just focusing on mercury as the issue, then you're going to miss a lot of other stuff, because they also have aluminum and formaldehyde, and there's a whole list of things that are bad. And as I mentioned with the foreign DNA, they're just playing Island of Dr. Moreau. They don't know, they're splicing things. It's basically like promoting transhumanism in a way, because it's like we don't really know what is going on when they do that. And so how are they going to make the vaccines if they take out all the adjuvants? Well, first of all, adjuvants actually help the immune response. So that's one of the reasons that they claim that they need all those toxins in there, because that'll actually boost your response. It'll make your immune system go hyperactive. So when they take those away, how's it going to work? So they, I don't, I'm not really back in, Kennedy at this moment. And because he seems to be focused on the mercury issue, and he seems to be focused on, the adjuvants issue, and he seems to support mandatory vaccination, or hasn't really come out on that yet. So, I'll have to wait and see.
Wow. All right. So what about some of these other points that we have here? Why are people afraid not to vaccinate?
I think because they are afraid of the disease. It's so much propaganda, about being unvaccinated. I mean, for me, I was terrified because, my doctor said, oh, if your kid gets the measles, it's going to be so bad. And, and I just thought, wow, that's really scary. So I think that's what it is. I think it's just afraid that their kids are going to get sick. They're trying to do their best as parents. And so they're going to give away their power to somebody they think is more knowledgeable than them. So back to your question, Joe, like what can parents know? Aside from the conflict of financial interest, they can also know that doctors don't actually know anything about vaccines. And those two things right there should help them know that this person doesn't have any authority over their kid.
Yeah, that's great information to pass around, and we should be sharing it all the time.
Yeah.
That the fact is that the doctors are just puppets in this regard and aren't reflecting some kind of training or science or studying. They've just been told these things
they're trained to repeat certain actions and do certain things for what they've been told, and that's about
they get paid, and they get paid a ton of money for it, and they get paid a ton of money to bully parents, right? Into when they're worried, into like not doing anything, and like to intimidate them. It's like, well, you're what are you doing, challenging a doctor? Who in the hell are you? The parents need to. I think it's sort of like this critical moment where enough concern is, generated by people who've been injured, parents who share this information, then other parents will start, basically becoming more bold about demanding to protect their children,
Absolutely.
Yeah.
All right, so let's get into the germ theory. And this is something that I've looked into maybe about a year ago. And I know there's a big controversy even over the germ theory, which most people just accept that all disease comes from germs and viruses and things like this. And that's the end of the discussion. These little, things that you can't see, kind of like little ghosts or little specters or something like that almost. They're microscopic or whatever. But, that's not to say that bacteria and spores and things like that don't exist. Obviously they do. But... so let's go into the germ theory, and we have about 7-8 minutes left.
Well, the germ theory was something that was brought in by Louis Pasteur, and he basically said that, germs were responsible for the majority of disease, if not all. I think is what and he had a contemporary by the name of Heinemann, and Heinemann said, well, no, I don't think it's actually germs at all, because how are you ever going to eliminate contact with germs? There's so many in our environment that's not possible. And he said it's more about the terrain. So in other words, if you have proper nutrition, if you wash your hands, he was a big proponent of wash hands, which people didn't always know how to do that. And so he said, if you do these simple things and you take care of yourself, and then you basically set yourself up for not contracting disease. So you can still come into contact with the germs, but they won't get you sick unless your terrain is messed up. So what we see a lot of times, people who have really poor diets and, or, have other kind of health issues, and they're the ones that are out there telling you, your unvaccinated kid is a threat to my vaccinated child, or I need you vaccinated. They're the ones that are promoting vaccines.
And meanwhile, they're eating tons of sugar and soda pop and processed foods and all of this stuff, right?
And they weigh 300 pounds,
Because they think everything is caused by the germs. So the disease is, the germs are what cause disease.
And meanwhile, most sickness, most disease is caused by diet and nutrition. And it's like, getting back to what people ate, say, in the 1880s, 1890s, rather than all of this processed food and vegetable oils and stuff that didn't exist 100 years ago. Why would you be consuming something that somebody's got feedback going through there, Joe or someone? That's terrible.
I can't hear it.
Can you cut down your speakers? I got feedback going through. Anyway, I can't talk, so I'll let you guys talk. It's looping.
It's funny, I can't hear it at all. Can you hear it, April?
I can hear him, but yeah, he has feedback.
Yeah, I can hear Jan. I just don't hear any feedback.
I don't know what's doing that. Yeah, it's looping back on me really badly. I'm hearing myself. So that's a type of mind control in and of itself, because it disrupts your ability to think properly when you hear yourself speaking like that. So
it does, yeah. Well, anyway, so yeah, the getting people to follow just the normal, things that we're aware of as far as keeping themselves healthy. That's kind of the first step, and it's directly related to the this issue with vaccination, because if people took their health into their own hands, they would be a lot more it would become normalized that they would basically insist upon some sort of rationale for every single thing a doctor gave to them. I mean, one of the things that the American public has is this sheep-like quality where, the doctor is what happens when they're sick. The food is what's available in the grocery store, and that's just the reality. They don't ever think about, what is being sold to me and told to me could all be fake or damaging.
Right.
So, like you said, when parents start.
And I'll eat it because it tastes good, not because it's good for me, essentially.
Right. So those are the very first things that people should, try to do to protect themselves, is try to find a way to eat better foods.
Yeah, just get back to a normal diet. Just meat, vegetables, and not all this processed junk.
Somebody's got their speakers on too loud. I hear terrible feedback. It keeps going even when April's talking. Somebody's speakers are too loud.
Turned it down.
How about me? And when I talk, does it...
Test. Now it's gone. Whoever adjusted their speakers got it.
Okay, yeah, he sounds fine.
Okay. So now I can finally talk, but I forgot what I was trying to say earlier.
April, can you we've only got a few minutes left. Can you possibly, in that time, give us, a summation, kind of some wisdom that you would pass along to the public and the parents?
Yeah, I would say that as a parent, you are your child's most important advocate, and you are the one that's really going to be responsible for their health. So you have to make this decision wisely, because if you make the wrong decision and have your child vaccinated and they get hurt, it's a lot harder to undo. In fact, it's close to impossible. So, take my advice that I have been through this, and it's something that I have to live with for the rest of my life, that I allowed my son to be tortured and damaged right in front of me. And it's not
There's a terrible feedback loop going on, you guys. I don't know what's going on. Whoever's not speaking needs to turn off their speakers or turn them down as far as they can, because there's a terrible feedback loop that only happens when speakers are up too loud.
Interesting. Yeah, well, my speaker is just at its normal. But anyway, so April, can you go on and just give us the finish up that thought?
Yeah. Just because a doctor is a doctor doesn't make them divine. So don't listen to just everything that they say. They don't have the power of God, and take that into your own hands. You are your child. You know what's best for your child intuitively, and trust that. Because parents, and then one of the things we worry about, is getting sick and their kids getting disease. But time and time again, we find that the unvaccinated are actually far healthier. And I can say that from personal experience, because I do have an unvaccinated daughter, and they're fine. All the things that we're talking about, breastfeeding, diet, nutrition, is enough to protect your child.
Right, the natural methods. Yeah, don't let the government tell you how to be a parent.
No. So that's what I would say.
Okay, well, it's just about we're about to.
That's what they're always trying to do there.
April, can you tell the public how to get a hold of you?
Yeah, you can find me at aidensrecovery.wordpress.com. That's spelled AYDANS. wordpress.com, and we still have our archive shows over at truthertalk.com, so you can find me there as well.
April, I just want to thank you so much. It's just such important testimony. It's really, really critical that this information gets out and gets spread. So I hope everyone who's been listening today and in the future to this information will, spread it to people. Tell more people about it.
Thanks, John. You're welcome.
All right. Thanks for coming on again. Gnosticmedia.com. Please support the show.
Yeah. Thank you, April.
Thank you, April. See you soon.
Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye-bye. See you next week.